Welcome to Drumbeats, the must-listen-to podcast which explains why Indigenous partnerships are the key to securing successful outcomes in natural resource and infrastructure investment in Canada. I'm Mark Magnacca, and my co-host Robert Brandt and I are joined today by Chief Derek Epp, Chief of the Chiacton First Nation and Chairperson at the First Nations Finance Authority. In January 2025, the FNFA reached a major milestone with the issuance of a $650 million debenture. Over the past 15 months, it has raised more than $1.3 billion through a combination of debentures and bonds, reflecting both its growing impact and impressive growth. This discussion highlights FNFA's approach to providing First Nations with access to capital at competitive rates. Once focused solely on infrastructure, the organization now supports large-scale ownership of projects across the resource and renewable energy sectors, proving its commitment to economic growth and sustainability.
Chief Derek Epp, Chief of the Chiacton First Nation in British Columbia. You've been with us before. You've been at our Canadian Indigenous Investment Summit now a couple of times.
Yep.
You're back in London, and we're really happy you've taken the time to talk to us once again. Welcome.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be back in London again. I seem to be making a habit of this and really enjoying my time over here and another successful summit this year. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Anyway, great to have you back.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Remind us where your community is and a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I've been the chief of Chiacton First Nation for almost a decade now. My community is on the west coast of Canada, about an hour and a half east of Vancouver, and heavily involved in a lot of the work across the country, really building out economies for First Nations is a lot of the passion that I do, and really supporting the access to capital and now looking at that international market and making sure we can bridge that gap.
In addition to Chief, you are also chair of the First Nations Financial or Finance Authority.
Yep.
You're also involved in what capacity on the board with the First Nations Tax Commission?
Yeah, so then I also chair or co-chair the First Nations Resource Tax Committee, among some other committees. Very involved in the Tax Commission, as you mentioned, the chair of the First Nations Finance Authority, and really heavily involved in the Lands Advisory Board as well. So the place I play politics is in the institutions that really support land and economic jurisdictions for First Nations.
And just, I guess, while it's fresh in our minds, because it wasn't that long ago, the second annual summit, some general impressions.
Yeah, I thought it was a really productive summit. And, you know, over the years of getting to know the two of you and really working on this, I think I'm actually was really, really impressed with this year's summit and how well it went, and really the connections that we've made. Even stemming from the summit, we've had subsequent follow-up meetings with investors and really looking at making sure that from the First Nations Finance Authority lens, that we're building those capital market relationships, but also was fortunate enough to build some relationships for my nation as well. And so I think, again, like this year's summit was something that, you know, I didn't expect when we started this journey, 3 years ago, on a bit of a trade mission with the British Consulate, and turned into this now, the Canadian Investment Summit. And
that's where you and I first met.
That's right.
3 years ago. A very small group, but mostly BC-based.
Yeah.
Indigenous leaders came over. You were part of that.
Yep.
And that was really where I got the idea that we needed to do something bigger.
Yep.
But that was 3 years ago, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. And it was a very different experience than what we had this year for the summit as well.
Yeah. Well, the third annual next year is going to be bigger and even better.
I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah. I think the opportunities are there.
Remind us, the FNFA, that organization, what that does.
Yeah, First Nations Finance Authority. Really, it began with the purpose of supporting First Nations ability to close our infrastructure gaps. And that was a lot of our first debenture, 2014, was $90 million. You know, for us, it was a big step. Providing access to capital is really what the mandate is for the First Nations Finance Authority at competitive rates. You saw it all too often. First Nations, if they had to access capital through conventional banks, we were paying excessive interest rates in the commercial interest rates, which was drowning a lot of the First Nations. So we're now in the federal index from the First Nations Finance Authority. And then if you look at our last debenture, which was in January 2025, we did $650 million this go around, and we've done a little over 1.3 billion in 15 months in debentures as well and bonds. So we've scaled, and now, as I said, it really began focusing on infrastructure, but we've evolved now to support large scale ownership of projects in the resource sector, renewable energy, whatever it may be, refinancing projects. We had one community, Henvey Inlet from the East Coast. They were paying in excess of $25,000 a day in interest in one of their projects. We were able to refinance that and actually combining interest, principal, all the payments. They've actually now are paying that $25,000 a day in paying off principal. So it's, that has made substantial impacts on the ability for First Nations to really keep those revenue streams in their community. And what you see with that is they begin to then leverage those revenue streams from the economic ventures to access more capital through the Finance Authority to provide that infrastructure that's needed in our communities, but also being able to meet the holistic needs for the membership as well. So it's having that ESG impacts, and you're seeing these social impacts in the communities from the First Nations Finance Authority. And it's one of the few national organizations that I really am extremely proud to do the work that we're doing there.
And your background is social work.
Yeah.
I think you said your family's background.
Yeah, I come from a long line of social workers.
And here you are in the heart of the financial district in one of the great financial cities of the world, promoting economic development. Where's the how does that happen?
Funny, my community is a very progressive economic development community. So I've been very fortunate to surround myself with a lot of capable individuals, and I've just been a sponge in learning as much as I can. And then in my first term as chief, I went back to UBC, did a bit of an undergrad in business with the purpose of laddering into an MBA. But time, family commitments, all that, haven't done it yet. But I can say I've gained some invaluable experience just working in this world now, understanding bonds, understanding financing, understanding what it takes to access capital, and then the importance of it, and then really even taking that from that national scale, but also doing it on my own individual community scale as well, and our tribe. So really, it's given me a lot of sound experience and knowledge in this area. But again, I make sure I surround myself with the right people to make sure that we're making really sound decisions as well. And I learn from them.
So with the FNFA, with your debentures, who's participating? Because you just don't have Canadian firms.
No, we're obviously going to the syndicates, and we have, the Asian markets, Swiss National Bank. We have some South American interests as well, but really where we're trying to diversify now is the UK market, and really making sure that we are accessing. We want to, our last debenture, I think, was around 3%, international, but we really want to grow that. I think that's important that we do grow that percentage pool moving forward and diversify. Most of the time, we're getting picked up by provincial pension funds or whatever it may be in Canada, domesticated. But really, it's important that we begin to go to the international markets.
And what's the pitch to international investors who are being pitched by issuers of debt from around the world? What's unique and what's attractive, should be attractive?
Yeah, I think investors? it's that ESG, it's that social impact. It's really, it's safe. We have so many safeguards within the FNFA's approach. We started this really building out our safeguards in 2008. When the market was crashing, we had a lot of uncertainty in the market. So we like to call our approach like Fort Knox. Like, it really protects not only the nations, but it also protects the investors. It's a pooled approach. So we have well over 100 First Nations communities as borrowing members now, and over half are scheduled to be borrowing members of the 600 and some odd communities across Canada. We have, I think, 375 who have the ability to borrow with us now. So that creates the safeguards for the investors. But almost just as important, it's what's being done with the capital, and really the impacts in the communities is what we like to show to the investors. We have a saying: every loan tells a story from the First Nations Finance Authority, and they do. We've done videos that we're happy to share with investors of what are the impacts being done. My community alone we've done a lot of housing projects over the last number of years, and investment in the culture because of the economic investments we've been able to do. We have one. I like to tell a story of an elder who we moved her home. She didn't live in our community for about 50 years, and simple things like she just says it's cozy, it's safe. I'm close to my family. I'm close to our cultural centers, and when I'm sick, my family can bring me soup. Those little things that are making a massive impact. And you see it in a lot of the stats that are happening in my community. We have no kids in the care of the ministry. I don't know a lot of communities, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike, can say that. We focus in on prevention. Our social health index is skyrocketing because of these investments. Very low unemployment rates. We have, a lot of these stats that we're really proud of that I think we outpace just the general society. And that's the impacts that the FNFA and these institutions are having in our communities and from these large projects. And that's what's happening.
It sounds like the way you talk about the economic development, the impacts, it sounds like an extension of your social work background. It's there's a real tie-in.
And that's the passion for me, right? It's balancing the economies with the community's needs and making sure that, but we're very transparent with our membership. And I think that happens across the country is, making sure they know that you can't have one without the other. You really do need to build an economy in order to be self-sufficient and build out programming that's different. We know like Western programming doesn't necessarily work for our people. So, having a program relationship with the government isn't going to fix that. Having an economy though will. And that's a lot of my passion and what I enjoy doing now. Yeah.
You mentioned the land. Which is the land subcommittee? Is that of the FNFA or
Lands Advisory Board is one of the institutions that are nationally. They're not part of the First Nations Fiscal Management Act, but they are one of the institutions that are attached to this organization we call Leading the Way.
Land is such a critical element of Indigenous life, and there's such a strong connection. What's happening in 2025 in the area of land management or land acquisition?
Buying land back, I think that's, I think it was you two that brought me to the term, the Yellowstone term, right? And that's kind of the show I haven't watched yet, but I've been told numerous times that what we're doing is akin to what Yellowstone is about. We've gone out and used the capital now, used our resources that we have through economic development to go and buy our land back. One of the only ways to actually try to get land back is through negotiations or settling a treaty with the federal government and provincial governments. But that's, proven to be extremely difficult, lengthy. My community spent almost 30 years in a treaty process and we didn't get a single piece of land back. And at the end of the day, it didn't work for us. It's not saying treaties don't work for every community, but it just didn't work for us. We took the economic approach, and now we've been able to acquire land back, expedite something called the additions to reserve process because of our capacity and our jurisdictions and our ability to actually move at the speed of business. And now we have a goal of doubling our land base in 2025, acquiring land through raising capital. At this year's summit, we had a group, Hungerford group, sharing about 7 Generations Capital. Or we have Cedar Leaf, or we have these other organizations as well that are accessing the capital markets. And we're really tapping into those revenue streams to go and do major land acquisitions and then develop joint ventures to have equity participation in all aspects of land development.
When you talk about land acquisitions, you're talking about going into the private market, buying land from private owners at market rates.
Yep.
And then taking that territory and adding it to your your reserve base.
Yeah, and it takes time, it takes money, it takes resources, but at the end of the day, when we add it to our reserve base, we function as any other government, and we do rely on property taxation, like any other government has to, and that's where we see that we use. I shared this year at the summit the term Tomiyuk. It's that 7 generational thinking, and so we take that lens to it, knowing that real estate it can be risky, but it can be successful, and over time is proven to be a very successful investment. But we know over time that tax revenue is something that my community can really depend on.
Where is your community located again, just for all our audience?
About an hour and a half east of Vancouver on the west coast.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you bring land back in, you're not bringing it back into nature just to leave so nobody develops it. You're actually, if I recall correctly, developing it.
Yeah, I mean, there is aspects of both. There is, but the purpose of doing these land acquisitions is so our community has the ability to continue to do the development over the next, 30, 40 years. And if we can acquire the land we want to, I know that our future councils, our Economic Development Corporation has the ability to, over time, continue to invest and develop out. And part of it is we know some of the land we've bought, it has water courses through it. And that sustainable piece that we're trying to do as well is reinvigorate and restore some of the water courses at the same time. So it goes hand in hand.
I was very lucky to be able to go out to your territory about a year ago, and I loved seeing the 3D map or model you had that was a size bigger than this table.
Yeah.
Most of it was, I forget which color, but the traditional territories.
Yep.
And then the actual reserve in the middle was postage stamp size. And so what you're talking about, and that includes the valleys, but then gorgeous British Columbia mountains and lakes. You're talking about buying more of that traditional territory back.
Exactly. And that's a lot. So then you look at the national scale. That's a lot of what's happening. And you have, especially if you look in Winnipeg or Ontario or some of the more rural and remote communities, in order for them to build.
Sorry, I'm from Brandon. Winnipeg is not rural. Everything between Brandon and Winnipeg is, but Winnipeg. Well,
what they're doing now, though, is buying these urban reserves, is actually buying fee simple land and navigating these processes and developing urban reserves so they can actually build an economy. And then they can go back to their, more rural, depending on where they are, their reserves, and be able to invest and bring in that critical infrastructure. Because you see when nations actually get that municipal-like infrastructure, that's when their economies begin to grow. But that takes time, that takes money, that takes resources. In order to do that, First Nations are now, as you said, buying land in their territory, fee simple, private land, and taking that jurisdictional approach and really beginning to be large players in all of Canada's economy.
So what's the next steps for the FNA? Where are you in terms of evolving that? Because that organization just seems to get stronger and stronger. Yeah,
so there's a lot of exciting stuff going on the FNFA, and really we're taking the next step to be able to change some of our policy to lend to special purpose vehicles. And that we really support a lot of the dialogue that we had at this year's summit in the resource or renewable energy projects. What happens when these projects are being considered is you have to go through a process of identifying impacted First Nations, impacted communities across Canada, and they could have the opportunity of participating in equity ownership stakes of these projects. Involved in one right now that has the potential of up to 46 communities that can be involved in one resource project.
Are they all touched by it, or is it an investment opportunity?
Investment opportunity.
Oh, okay.
And it's within their territory, so they're identified as having impacts on the project. So they have the ability it triggers a consultation, but it also, what proponents, and this is the important part now, are getting ahead of that and coming to First Nations before projects are being considered to talk about equity ownership. It de-risks the project, but it also is important to economic reconciliation to really have Indigenous communities involved in these projects. Now, what happens though is we create special purpose vehicles through limited partnerships, general partnerships, and we create a transaction committee, a subset of those 46 potential communities to actually stick handle the negotiations so that we don't have 46 individual communities having to be negotiating one project. It really helps speed up the process and ensures that there's a de-risking element to the investment as well. So that's the next step for the FNFA, so that we can lend to those special purpose vehicles. Right now, we can't. So it's a gap in the market. And, you see when you're talking about the competitive interest rates that the FNFA can offer, that really enhances all the revenue streams back to the nations. And that's the critical part about what we're trying to do is, every dollar makes a difference when you're talking about bringing revenues back to First Nations. And that's the next step for the FNFA.
Just coming back to the Summit Clearwater
Yes.
Seafoods, which the FNFA was involved with.
Yep.
And that was a group of 7
Yes.
that came together. You didn't need an SPV for that because I think they resolved it.
Yeah, they did. It was individual loans to the individual communities, and they had varying percentages of equity depending on their risk tolerance and their ability to actually pledge revenue streams to be a part of that project.
Right.
Yeah.
And then just a shareholders agreement, I guess, with the because there's a 50% shareholder, and then yeah.
So you're talking something obviously completely different in terms of scale.
Yeah, we're talking about multi-billion-dollar projects, right? And so
if you're a proponent of a project and you want to do equity with Indigenous peoples, you do not want 30, 40, sometimes more
No, definitely
shareholders that you have to deal with. So set up a separate entity where the governance can be looked after separately, and you're just dealing with the one face.
Exactly. And that's critical to the success of these deals. Even if you look at Trans Mountain, likely, that's going to be divested eventually onto First Nations as well. At potential of 130 communities could be involved. But again, it's that subcommittee that will be established to stick handle the negotiations.
So where is Trans Mountain?
Trans Mountain runs from Alberta. Sorry.
In terms of the timeline.
Yeah.
Of what's happening, but please explain geographically where it is because we all say it and we know where it is.
I mean, Trans Mountain was about in 2024. It was announced that they were going to try to offload Trans Mountain to First Nations. It's stalled out because of the election in 2025, but everything's indicating to this next government. Or the current government will be looking to offload the asset to the First Nations in this term. So,
this was the crude oil pipeline running from Alberta to take the oil to the coast of British Columbia, and federal government took over the project. Total cost something like $30 billion.
35 billion
dollars, but it is complete. It's operational, and it's, I don't know what, the 800,000 barrels a day of additional capacity for export.
It's flowing through now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So sunk cost.
Yeah. And ultimately we know when the federal government took over that, it de-risked the actual build out of it as well. And we know the $35 billion that it cost to build it, that's not going to be the price that's going to be paid for that either, right? There's going to be a bit of a reduction because of the escalated prices that it took to build that out. But it's going to be, I would guess it's going to be north of $20 billion.
What I love about part of the story anyway was your community is directly affected. The pipeline runs right through. You were part of groups objecting to the build and going to court and slowing things down. Now you're part of a group that may want to buy it.
Yeah.
How does that work? An investor over here seeing media coverage of the court cases and now saying, but those people are now buying.
And he's chair of the FNFA?
Yeah. I mean, really what it came down to was we wanted to have our environmental standards met. And at the time, none of them were we had 89 recommendations that we put out from my tribe to say, to protect the environment, protect the fish. One was adopted, one of 89. So that was where the issues were. So now strategically understanding that, the project's done, oil's flowing. Now what we've taken the approach, and this is what a lot of the shift over the years has been now is, okay, well, let's get involved in these projects, owning the asset, so we can make sure that the environmental mitigation measures that we want to be involved in, well, let's be an owner. Then we can actually have, instead of sitting on the sidelines and complaining, and really, not showing support. Well, let's own it, and let's be able to put in some of the measures that we've talked about, and be that responsible owner of an asset like that. So that's where the mindset has really shifted over the years. And that's why I think you're going to see the investment in the next couple of years in a lot of resource and renewable energy projects, because, First Nations have shifted their mindset to let's own, let's control, let's protect the environment a bit more rigorously. And that's, in my mind, I've always, really thought that way, but it's really starting to get traction across Canada now.
Yes. And I think the other thing, we had Indigenous people from across the country, which was great.
Yeah.
Right? North, south, east, west. But you hear a lot about British Columbia and what's going on there. And I guess, is that partly because so much isn't covered by treaty, or are these the nations who are, new opportunities in front of them are taking a different look at how to proceed and succeed?
I think it's both, right? I think there's so many, there's a lot of BC alone, the critical minerals and resources available in BC alone are substantial. And there's going to be a lot more linear projects needed to really get some of these resources to the international markets. You look at the Heisley deal, Cedar LNG, huge success. And that's something that I think we're going to see repeated more often now. And, First Nations now are sophisticated. We know how to navigate these projects. It was newer to a lot of the communities in the southern BC area, but a lot of these new projects, the Trans Mountain, the liquid natural gas projects, has created comfort for more of the southern communities now, and we're really looking forward to what's possible in the next coming years on resource projects, and we're ready to take charge in some of these.
That just reinforces, in terms of Canada being an energy superpower, and the potential that still remains. Right, a lot of the hydro is done and covered, but there's all kinds of other opportunities in natural resources and infrastructure to take everything to the next level as Canada goes ahead and repositions its trading relationships.
Absolutely.
Indigenous people will be at the heart of the trading relationships once again with foreign nations, which is great.
It's exciting times.
Chief, thanks again. Great to see you, and thanks for taking the time out to chat with us.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Chief. Yeah. Thank you to Chief Derek Epp for sharing his insights with us. And thank you for viewing and listening. Be sure to share, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast channel. Thanks for listening to Drumbeats. Until next time.